Okay. Hey, how are you? Wait, the sound on your end.
How
I
about,
took you off. Can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Okay.
me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Just give me 1 second. I was just finishing something up real quick.
Okay, take your time.
I swear, Zoom is so funny nowadays. We forget that the sound's not always on or off. Anyway, all right, just give me 1 second. Let me just find your intro. Okay. One, two. All right, here we go. It was here. All right. Okay, so now that it's started, here we go. All right. Welcome back, everyone. So, this week, the conversation is now going to be with a friend of mine from LinkedIn, and her name is Hady. So,
Hottie.
hey, so I'm going to give you a little, I'm going to read your intro for you, and then I think we're going to do you want to focus on the hierarchy of needs, or do you want to tell your story first, and then we'll leave that for second?
What's the hierarchy of needs? I, I,
So,
I came
the higher
prepared. I came prepared to answer the 10 questions you sent me. I'm not, tell me more about the hierarchy of needs.
So
Oh, yes, I do know what the hierarchy of, that's the thing you talked
you
about
had to have.
today.
I know you had to have learned about this back in your
No, no, no.
your
I
college
know what
days.
you're talking about now.
Basic,
Sorry.
yes, basic. It's basic psychology. So I know you came prepared to answer the 10 questions, but I think the hierarchy of needs also plays into parts of your life as well as career. So I'll give the intro first. For those who don't know, Hattie started her own consultancy called Boldly Speaking LLC. This is a company that expands the conversation around what we call DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Now, probably earlier on in her working career, if I am correct, these were affirmative action hiring programs, correct? Or was it similar? You can tell me this.
Yeah. Earlier in my career, I wasn't directly involved in DEIB, but I will tell you that when I graduated from school and I started working at Accenture, they did have a diversity task force that was separate and apart from anything related to affirmative action. So I would say in the early part of my career, it was already known as diversity. It wasn't DEIB, but it was diversity.
I feel like it's changed over the last 2 decades for with good intentions, but not every group always gets represented the way they'd like to, but that will be for later. So, with the diverse career spanning over 25 years, Hattie has served as the head of equity for a major tech firm, multiple customer service facing roles in high tech financial services. She served as a leader across various employee resource groups or ERGs. She's volunteered as an international champion for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women. She served as community school director of an elementary school in the South Bronx. Her academic credentials are a Bachelor of Science in Computer Information Systems. Also from Manhattan College, she has graduate certificates in e-business and e-commerce from NYU and NYJIT.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of,
NJIT,
yeah, New Jersey Institute of Technology.
New Jersey Institute of Technology. She also holds a family development credential from UConn. Ironically enough, my little brother actually graduated from the computer science school at UConn back
Oh,
in
okay.
2016, I think it was. Uh, and additionally, she's done advocacy work as a member of the NYU advisory board at Room to Grow. She served on a nonprofit based in the South Bronx. She's served on the board of Pan Peru USA. I'm probably going to ask you a little bit about their mission at some point today during the recording. She's also organized Mission to Empower Low Income Women in Rural Peru in her free time. She's an amateur street photographer and an avid podcast listener. So, welcome today. So we're gonna start out by discussing a little bit on the hierarchy of needs, which is a post that I just did yesterday on LinkedIn. So give me one moment. I'm gonna pull that up. So I remember back in my business school when have in my business days, because I started college in 2004. It took me all the way between part-time and full-time till 2019 to finish both degrees. That was due to a math course, but we're not going to talk about that because that's me. You're here today and this is about you. So the bottom of the pyramid, which is psychological needs, the things that most of us feel we need in this world, which basically in a sociology course is quite interesting. Everyone feels they need air, water, food, shelter, clothing. And then he was talking about reproduction because, man and woman. And then level two of that pyramid would be safety needs, personal security, empowerment, resources, health, and property. Now, within these two levels, where do you feel on the hierarchy of needs at the start of your career some of these fit, or did they not fit?
Um, well, hi to your audience, first of all, and hello to you, Ben. Um, I would say that in the early part of my career, I was looking to make some money and to learn. Those were my two objectives, was to learn. I was working for a consulting company, and I was looking to just absorb from the people around me and learn the ways of being a good consultant. And then I was also looking for money because I had bills to pay. I had college student loans, like, that's a kind of a big topic these days, but I had student loans to pay back at that time. I also had bought a car because I was living in Queens and working in New Jersey. So I had to pay my car loan. And then, like you need money to like buy yourself a food, pay your rent, like kind of those basic things. And so I remember, it's so funny you asked this question because I remember when I went to what was the equivalent of a boot camp. And it was a very,
well, for you, that would have been community college, right?
no, boot camp, I mean at Accenture.
Oh, Accenture, a hiring program?
It was like the onboarding process.
Internship.
It was the onboarding. No, so I was working at Accenture and they had a 6-month onboarding process. And I'm calling it a boot camp because it was like super intense for those 6 weeks. And 3 out of those weeks, you're like in your home office, and then 3 weeks they ship you off to their like someplace in St. Charles, Illinois, and they get everybody together. And it's super intense. You're working like 7 days a week and, couple hours a day, and everybody's programming and you're like clicking away, trying to solve problems. And anyways, during that time, I remember having like a lot of imposter syndrome, like just feeling really doubting myself and my abilities and my skills. And I remember saying, I can't quit the job though, because I have to pay I have to pay my car loan and my student loans.
So I don't know if I would call that so much imposter syndrome, because honestly, I found that it's funny. I think before you came on, if you remember, we were talking about this earlier in the summer, and on a pre-screen call, and I was saying myself, I used to ask what the heck this was when people posted about it. And then I finally realized, oh, okay, so this is what it now is, because I'm seeing other people achieve milestones that I have yet to even be able to scratch the surface with just yet. And I'm at a little more of an advanced stage than, let's say, today's college graduates. Obviously, age is a number, and you would probably, be aside from my mother, be another one who would best be able to, say that, age is a number, or age is in our mind. Now, my guest last week was a former NYPD officer, and I did something a little interesting, which was called the political spectrum and the generation. and the generational identification. So for those who are going to probably start seeing this for the first time, do you fall between Gen X, which was a little bit of a smaller generation, whereas boomers and millennials, which would be Gen Y, and then the baby boomers, you know, would be the two larger
I'm
generations?
Generation X.
So for those who don't know, Generation X was 1965, were born 1965 to 1980, correct? And this was,
I don't know about those numbers, but I was definitely born between that time. So yes,
yeah.
I'm
So then
definitely
that was
X.
Gen X. And it was actually funny because last week, my guest was a former NYPD officer who served on the force for 13 years. His name is RV. I don't know if you've ran across his posts on LinkedIn before, but now he's a consultant at this stage later on in his life who's been in the food and beverage industry. But we had a whole great conversation last week about public policy, via New York City and New York State, and kind of, how we all feel policing has gotten out of hand, but that's a separate issue. Anyway, he was born 1962, so he's at the very end of my parents' generation. And that book that was written about the generations was really more to define eventually who would become more proficient with technology. So if you are Gen X, then my guess was they had started to gear things like your degree toward to start looking at the next two generations in terms of technology, because it had started evolving a little more in your lifetime, right?
Making me feel like I'm 1,000 years old, Benjamin. Come on now.
I've adjusted just like you have, and I was born in 1985. So guess what? We're both having to constantly adjust with technology since not all of us were born with it. In fact, here's a little funny joke, especially for earlier millennials. I still have a television in here that has a tube. I'm sure you remember this.
Mm-hmm.
The technology that we both respectively grew up with is now outdated. I mean, look at the fact that with Zoom now, you can make a podcast much easier than when I would have wanted to do this back in the 2000s or the early 2010s. That's how far technology has evolved.
Yeah, there was like I studied computer information systems, so tech was definitely a thing when I was in college, but I'm sure what my major looks like now and what I studied is materially different than what people study today when they're studying computer information systems or computer information sciences or anything like that. My major was it was
Info
different from
systems, right? So what was, in a sense, what was computer information systems when you were learning it? Was it more like an IT geared degree?
it was. I'll tell you three things that make up CIS or information systems. It was in the School of Business. So it was not a math and science. It was in the School of Business. So I got a business degree. It's definitely less technical. I took some programming classes, but that's not all I took. And I know like my peers that were in comp sci, they were like programming for 4 years or whatever, for really like most of the time. I was not programming all the time. I also was doing other things like systems analysis and requirements, looking at requirements and management information systems. And what is that, like helping senior leaders, giving them data so that they can make good decisions. So it was definitely less technical, more focused on how to use technology in a business setting. So if you're in marketing or finance or economics or whatever the case might be, how would you use technology to support that role? So that was the context. It was all about business and how to use technology for business.
Would you have considered yourself at that stage more of what we call an analyst today, or what we call a program manager?
Neither really. I mean, I was a programmer, and my first job and my first two jobs, I was a programmer. I was an application developer. I programmed in languages that don't exist today, but like, I was doing, front end programming and then some back end work as well. So I was a programmer. But I think you could do lots of different things with that degree.
We still have that term around today, which is a programmer. It's just now they call it, they change the wording, just like, for example, when you and I were both respectively growing up, what we call today ND, which is neurodivergence, neurodiverse people, when I was growing up, I think you probably even remember the original name. At one point, they thought if you had autism, which is what it's called today, before that, when I was a kid, it was Asperger's syndrome. Before that, they just literally thought people were mentally retarded if they didn't, regurgitate or learn the old way that education had been for years. And education, in all honesty, this would be for a panel discussion. Education is due a serious upgrade right now, because the way you and I process information versus how kids are being taught today is worlds different. I remember having to learn math the chalk way, and that's why my college degrees took me literally almost 10 years to finish, was literally because of math. When I came back the second time around to finish my bachelor's degree in business administration and sports management, the only reason there had been a lot of changes within technology, so much so that it became more module based math. And I'm sure that was partly influenced with your generation adding this into educational curriculum. It made it a little easier for me to finally be able to get through that hurdle.
It's interesting that thank you for sharing that. I worked at a school not too long ago, a couple years ago, and I'm not a teacher, but I was a community school director. But I got a little insight into some of the changes that were being made and some of the ways the school is really required to support neurodivergent children. And, oftentimes, because it was an elementary school, the children are young. So I think that's probably where some of these different way of learning and thinking starts to show up. And a lot of, children were getting evaluated and people were getting different supports based on the needs that they had. But I agree with you that, I think when I was growing up, everybody was just put in a class.
The supports for both of us on some level, especially for where I am now, they were non-existent when I was coming out of high school. It was terrible.
I was just gonna say everybody was just like kind of thrown in a class, and it was like that was the special needs class, and I don't really know what kind of support they were getting. And then now I feel like it's so much more individualized, and it's all like a function of the child and what the child needs. And
now imagine if I were a kid today versus being a kid in the 90s or the 2000s. I probably would have been better off today than, what happened to me. But then again, would we be here doing this today? And we don't know that. If, all these supports that existed today had existed back then, I might have thrived a little bit more. But we don't know, because unfortunately, this came too late for me. As last week I just turned 38 in the middle of the week. So I'm
Congrats. Happy birthday.
40. Thank you.
But you know what, Ben? I sorry to interrupt you, but I want to say something, because you're pointing something out that's really important. I think what you're talking about speaks to the power of advocacy, because that was not okay what was happening in the 90s and even before then. That it was not okay, that it was just like throw everybody together and just like forget about them, or throw everybody together and just be like, well, we don't really know what they need.
Well, then you set them up for, unfortunately, the situation that I ended up in, where at this stage in my life, I just reached 20 years in freaking customer service. No offense to customer service, but if you're telling me in an article that I've referenced several times across this podcast from the University of Indiana about what are good jobs for autistic people, if you're going to tell me customer service is a good fit for us, then I have news for you. It's a horrid fit. It's a horrid fit. Maybe for a person who feels they might not want to move out of their career, make more money, because everybody's obviously different. So if you're a lower functioning autistic, I understand that, but you can't put lower function autistic and higher function autistic in the same discussion or the same diagnosis, because we develop two completely different ways. Look at me and look at a lower functioning autistic.
Again, I think what you're saying speaks to the power of like advocacy. Advocacy is important because, one, it changes things, but two, it educates and informs. And I feel like if we look at DEI and what's been a missing link as it relates to neurodivergent people, is the lack of knowledge and lived experience. And it's so like, if you don't have knowledge and lived experience, it's like, well, we don't really know, so we'll just do this one thing, and that should help these people, this group of people. But like you
Yeah,
said,
but it
this group
doesn't.
of people, there's a whole spectrum in this group of people that you know, who their needs might be different, and so we really need people that have lived experience being part of the solution. That's a big, I think.
Yeah, because I'm glad that you've said that, because quite frankly, I don't want to come off as I'm misunderstanding of this, but if you don't mind me saying this, and then you're welcome to give your side of it. I feel in this country, especially, we have done a lot for people of color. We have done a lot for the Latin community. But in this country, especially, we have, in my own lifetime, through my own eyes, we failed people like myself. We haven't provided enough people like myself with the opportunities that maybe you were given to create a abundant life for yourself. Even if it meant that, you know, you might not have a life's partner and you're happy with what you're doing, you know, at this stage in my life. Look at somebody like me. Nobody ever sat down and asked me, hey, what do you want?
Um, it, I'll go into this a little bit because I don't think it's like one or the other. I think it's both and. So I feel like DEIB, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. You talked about it earlier, but I'll say it again just for the benefit of your audience. It started off focused probably on gender. I think that was like kind of where it started, and then it expanded to include race and ethnicity and sexual orientation and gender identity. And I would say like maybe within the last 3 to 5 years, it's really opened up to include a lot more communities, such as neurodivergent people. And while neurodivergent people probably have always been protected by like the American with Disabilities Act, which protects this group against discrimination and requires employers to make
Up
reasonable
to a point. Up to a point, because
No, I get it, but
I
there's
experienced a little
yeah,
bit of that.
it's I'm getting there. I don't think it's
Yeah.
enough. One of the reasons is because neurodiversity usually is invisible. And so unlike other forms of diversity, such as race and gender, where you could see that I'm a Latina woman or a woman of color, I may not know that you're a person that's neurodiverse by looking at you.
And
So
that's okay, because I can say, obviously, it's not physical. And this is where the government, unfortunately, I really hate to say it at this point with the government, this is where, I'm sorry to say this and start to get a little political on this, but this is where we need to start cutting off certain age groups in the government and bring in younger ideas. For example, I don't mind if somebody is up to 80 years old, like Senator Bernie Sanders, because Senator Bernie Sanders, in a lot of ways, has a very young mind, because who were the groups of people voting for Bernie? My age group, younger. The youth supports him because he understands, you know, he understands not just income inequality, he understands everything that in DEIB you're discussing. That's somebody who can stick around because his message resonated with these communities.
I also think, in my humble opinion, I feel like, you know, the civil rights movement and other like movements related to racial equality, gender equality, they were started by people in those communities, and then they got allies to kind of join in the fight. And I feel like that builds the case for like, you know, there was something in a saying that started in South Africa, and it was actually started by the people in the community, in the I guess I want to say people with disabilities started this rally cry. And it was the disabilities movement that started it. And it's called, the rally cry is "No decision about us without us." And it's a motto that many groups now use to stand in their power, because no one knows what's best for the community, but for people in the community. And so, you know, at the end of the day, I would say we are our own best advocates. And to the degree that we feel passionate about something enough and we feel courageous enough, we can use our voices to advocate for ourselves and others. And I feel like the neurodivergent people are gonna get more from work and life and other situations, to the degree that there's people like you, Ben, calling attention to the gap and also raising your voice to say, here's what we need. Because everybody, like, in order to do your best work, you're going to need certain accommodations. What is it that you need? Do you need flexibility? Do you need your manager to be more educated? Do you need your manager to be more open to having conversations about what's going to get you to do your best work? Do you need companies to view you as more than just customer service agents? So I feel like
I'm going to answer that for you. So most of that is actually very true. I need to be viewed as more than customer service because that's been a complete pigeonhole. And when I'm saying pigeonhole nicely rather than what I really want to say, which is, no offense, corporate America, you guys really messed up in your evaluations of what somebody of my ability and intelligence can do in terms of, in terms of work. Hence, this is why what you're describing is exactly the mission of the podcast. If I'm basically, constantly sitting here and creating content, that through this I developed the podcast. The podcast puts me in a much different light than what we're looking at as, oh, well, you need a bachelor's degree for so and so. Whereas if you take a look at the questionnaire and the thing we're doing right now, this is taking all the skills from my business degree and communications and putting it together.
yeah.
But unfortunately, because a lot of people within an HR department or recruiters and hiring managers apparently can't properly evaluate talent, it's not so much education. We're going to need a new way to be looking at talent. I don't know if you would agree with me on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it happens to all of us. It happens to people of color, women, and other groups too. Like, it's like,
if I'm taking to YouTube just to show myself differently off, which includes podcasting, then basically our evaluations being done on people are too black and white.
There's a lot of biases that are built into evaluations, and judgment calls that are made around hiring, around advancement, around talent management, etc. People have biases, and people have, every day people are making, or are, like you said, you used the word pigeonhole. I think that's an accurate way of saying, like, they put people in a box and they say, I see you, but what I see is this. And it's like, we have to fight every day, literally, to say, well, that's not the only thing I'm capable of. Like, I would just say, let's just use something pretty basic. I'm a DEI speaker, I'm a public speaker, and I'm Latina, right? So people usually ask me to speak during Women's History Month and during Hispanic Heritage Month. Am I able to speak about a lot more topics other than that? You better believe it. I have lots of talents, lots of things I could talk about. I could talk about.
But they hire you specifically for that.
They put me in a box and they're like, Hady, we're going to bring you in for Hispanic Heritage Month. That's the best time to bring you in. But I can talk about a lot of things the rest of the year. And that's,
yeah, but Hispanic Heritage Month is 365 days a year, not 1 month.
Exactly.
Just like Black History Month and Neurodivergent Month is 365 days a year. But apparently corporate America is stuck in, I honestly don't want to say, now, you know what? I do want to say it. Corporate America is literally stuck in Joe Biden and my parents' generation of thinking, i.e. we're still stuck in the mid-20th century.
I don't know if it's that, and I don't want to get into politics because I like Joe Biden, but I'll say this.
I like Biden, but I'm just referencing the thought.
No, I know what you mean. You're talking about the mindset, but I'll say this. The corporate America is people. So it's not, we can't even just say corporate America like it's not a person. It's people. People put other people in boxes. And it's the responsibility of people like you and me to make sure that we have a seat at the table. So we're like saying, like, no, like, it's not okay to put people in boxes.
Then maybe the next question to actually ask ourselves, before I touch on some of the next questions, would be, are the people in hiring management roles competent or incompetent when they're doing their jobs, and are they just weak? Because I have of contact who I cut off earlier this year, who was once a very old friend, who's literally what you would call an okay boomer in his mindset. He took a job for more money as a leader in a department when he used to tell me in text he couldn't really necessarily hire or do the job correctly without relying on a recruiting team to be able to spot. And then he got stripped of it because the person he hired was a college kid who was deemed an office distraction, just like him, because that's what he hired that he could relate to. Effectively, hiring managers today want to hire I guess what you would call a unicorn, but they're not then, and this is in my own age group. So, the people who are getting promoted into hiring management titles probably might not necessarily be capable of actually doing the job, because being a leader nowadays, you have to be sort of a thought leader in addition to not just a textbook manager. But I could be wrong on this, and feel free to say something.
Yeah, I would not categorize all leaders as incompetent. I wouldn't go that far. What I would say is that a lot of people are used to doing things a certain way. And sometimes doing things a certain way doesn't include a lot of people, or doesn't like bring in, a bigger audience, or doesn't allow space for, accommodating different scenarios. And I feel like it's a little bit lazy, if you ask me. It's not incompetency. It's sort of,
That was the word I was doing my best to stay away from.
but yeah, but I don't think it. I think it's fair to say that, you don't want to work too hard to find good talent, and that's not the best way to bring together a team. You want to bring
Then
together.
you're going to get a bunch. Then you're going to get a bunch of questionable people who might not be capable of doing the job, and then you have somebody who has been in the workforce for quite a while that knows most of the ropes anyway, and doesn't want to be told, "Oh, you'll hire somebody with corporate experience, but you won't hire somebody that you agree or disagree with." But that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah,
So,
no, I feel like, if an organization is deeply committed and invested in DEIB, they will properly train their leadership team, their people managers, and there will be a whole like strategy around different groups. And neurodivergent people kind of deserve their own strategy. It's separate and apart from maybe a strategy to get more women in engineering, or separate and apart from trying to get more people of color in sales, or separate and apart from trying to get more vets, hired into your organization. Like, there's lots of different groups, constituents, if you will, and each of them require an individual strategy that's tailored to the needs of that group, and that is informed by the people in that group. Those are the two things. You need your own strategy for all the groups, and then you need that strategy to be informed by people who have lived experience and who can say, like, yep, not all neurodivergent people are the same. Here's a whole spectrum of different, how they show up. For some groups that need this, some other groups need a little bit more, etc. So I do feel like if people want to do the work, there's a lot of potential for how people can include, companies can be hiring more diverse talent and accommodating and creating a good workplace where everybody can thrive. And that, to me, is the goal. But I feel like some people are not as invested in doing that. They kind of just want to do things the way they've always done them. And that's just not a good recipe for success.
no, and that's actually a recipe for why most of the Fortune 500 are probably tanking nowadays, and now having to, go through mass layoffs with this whole return to the office mandate. But that's a whole panel discussion right there. So, pyramid level 3, in what you touched on it with the EIB, which is about belonging. So I would assume you are very big on friendship, intimacy, family, and sense of connection. Did you find that in some of the places that you worked, or did you find that more among peers separate from work? And how did you cultivate those relationships? Like, for example, doing program manager at JP Morgan Chase.
All right, I feel like there was a lot of questions there. So I'll start off by saying that a sense of belonging is pretty important. And I didn't always feel like I belonged in the spaces that I occupied, if I'm honest. I remember I joined the workforce in the 90s, early 90s, And as a Latina in financial services and tech, I was often one of the few or the only in the room. And I didn't always feel like I
So it was
belonged.
mostly white male dominated.
Mostly, and not exclusively, but yeah, like I was usually the only Latina in the room when I was or on a project or in my start group or whatever the case might be. Like I said, any room I occupied, I was usually the only Latina. Maybe there was a black woman or another woman of color that was also there, but like usually I was the only. And I think my lived experience as a Latina drew me to DEI because I was very personally invested in seeing more diversity and inclusion at work. Like, I wanted things to be different. I was hopeful that there would be other, as soon as I hoped, my hope was that there would be other people like me. And so, but DEI was very different back in the day. In the early 90s, we didn't talk about DEI the way we talk about it today. We're so much more open now. There's so much more awareness. I think
Partly
companies,
also because you have things that developed along from the
yeah,
90s to
a,
today, which
a
was
thousand
also
percent,
including exposing everything on social media. A
a
lot's more
thousand
gotten
percent.
exposed.
But net, companies are much more invested right now from a resource perspective. They have strategies, they have goals, they're transparent about those. That's like a new thing, like the last maybe probably 5 years or something. Like people never would have been like, and our goal is to get to 15% Latinas and in our engineering team or something like that. That's unheard of. It's a completely different world today. And while there's been a ton of progress, there's also still a long way to go.
Well,
So
that's what I say, especially within the community that I'm from, because I was just talking about this with somebody who I'm working with outside as it's a volunteer. Her name's Allison Jones. Her organization out in California is called, and I'll share the link with you later, is called Minds of Light. So she's mid 40s white woman who's also like myself neurodivergent, and we were both just speaking about this middle of the week, and we were both saying companies need more people like myself giving them trainings and
yep,
educational material on how to work with people like me, because
do it.
back to that whole customer service pigeonhole with me, this is not what I'm meant to do. You can see by how I put everything together for this that I'm capable of doing much more than what a black and white piece of paper or some stupid college credential says I can do. Like the fact that I even need to be told, if you want to make a better salary, you need to go back to school again, spend enough, invest, but I would basically say waste another 20 to 40K for a certified series of classes for a degree that may or may not get me promoted within my organization or outside is another gamble.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying at this point that there isn't a place for education, but if we're calling today in corporate America, this is how you make more money, which is getting more education, then we still haven't fully evolved to the point where we're looking at alternatives, or we're looking at how I put things together with something like this. This is what I took from the degree. This is what I'm capable of doing.
Ben, this education issue, it doesn't only affect the neurodivergent population, it affects low-income people as well. So a lot of Black and brown people are impacted by what you're talking about because they can't afford college educations.
I couldn't afford college either by myself. And guess what? If you really looked at the fact that both my parents made six figures, and I came from Cross River. I spoke about this with two different past guests, three of which were all social work majors, two clinical therapists, and one woman who, like yourself, became what we call a DEI advocate, or she was a registered lobbyist first after being a social worker, and now she sits on various nonprofit board of, various nonprofit boards in PA. She and I spoke about this too. And yes, I did come from the Cross River, the Northern Westchester Cross River community, but I didn't necessarily come from a family with a lot of money. So the opportunities given to me versus my peers were severely different. So you know, low income people like myself do exist. It's just, it's not virtually something you would discuss in the wealthier communities, but they exist. It's called the other side of town.
Yeah, I was gonna say, all of us hold multiple identities. So we could be neurodivergent and queer and low income, or we could be, a
White,
veteran.
neurodivergent, low income. There you go.
Yeah, there's a mix. We're
It
all,
exists.
yeah, we all have multiple identities, and to the degree that we hold multiple identities, we can be placed in a more stringent box, because it's like they already people are going to think one way of you because you're neurodivergent. They might think of you in even a more severe way, thinking that you're a low income neurodivergent person, or queer neurodivergent person, or I don't know, that, like, I know, when you have that intersectionality of identities that are severely underrepresented, and people hold a lot of biases against you, that box that people put you in gets smaller and smaller. And it I think it speaks a lot to why people, there's a lot of people that are unhappy, that have a lot of mental health, like, that are experiencing a lot of mental health issues, that are feeling burnt out, that are like sick and tired of being sick and tired, that are just starting their own business, that are quitting their jobs, that are quiet quitting, that are just saying, enough, I can't, I just can't, like,
What do you think I'm doing? You
this is
just hit
not
on exactly
sustainable.
what I'm doing. I joined the quiet quitting movement and basically started saying, I'm not going to go jump through hoops right now. If something like this can at least bring me some public speaking gigs, ability to create content, and then I could get an income outside of work instead of having to be told by friends who go over bank statements, and I'm not against that. You can't, I don't care what people say, especially in the modern personal finance realm. You can't save your way to buying a house nowadays. And I understand why some people still look black and white like that, like it's possible. It's not. You need an additional income, or you need one or two extra income streams, which is what most people will say nowadays, just to be able to afford other things. Like if I had an extra income, not just one primary income through a job like these CEOs have, I could then invest that toward maybe getting other qualifications like you did. You can't save your way to a house. You can't budget your way to a degree nowadays. Look at the look at look at what we've experienced the last 2 years with higher prices deemed inflation. Look at the cost of a house in Westchester County today versus 50 years ago.
Yeah, for me, I was saving up for a house. It was gonna be my retirement home. And then I unexpectedly got laid off earlier this year. And now I'm dipping into my savings
You don't have a choice. That's
pay
the whole
rent,
thing,
to
right?
pay rent and to pay my bills, because yeah, that's the situation that I'm finding myself in.
Exactly. And this goes to show you that no matter what, and it's a friend that I was with last night. I understand and appreciate what he's giving across his advice, but once you've been in your occupation, in his case, as a civil engineer for up to 10, 11 years, I feel like you lose touch with what somebody's going through, because even last night you spoke of layoff. I was just telling this person last night, I sent him what the job market looks like today. I'm like, so here's what everyone's dealing with today, probably yourself included. Contractors, temp workers. This is how you get into a company now on a 90-day, i.e. 3-month temp contract. You don't necessarily know if it's going to work out. And we're not looking at 10, 11, 12 years ago where you hit the end of some people, getting hired, getting their salary right away, and then being able to work up and build time, with a place nowadays to where you are later in life, where in his case, he could get married. Today, within the last decade, a lot of that's gone. It's starting off as temp contracts, and you can't build a life this way. That's what the market's turned into now.
Yeah, I know there's a lot more gig workers, so to speak, people who are getting paid for gigs, like you said, like, short-term contracts or opportunities. I know the gig market has definitely grown and expanded. And you and I are not the only ones with side hustles. I think a lot of people, especially I think the younger generations, that's very normal for young people to have full-time work, side work, passion projects, fun things, content, creating content, making a podcast, like it's just very, I hate to use the word normal, but it's just something
No, it's normal.
that
This is the new.
everybody kind of.
That's what my best friend who got married in August probably will not understand now. This is the new norm.
But the fact is that even though it's quote unquote the new norm, I think other people are adopting it. So like I'm a Generation Xer. I'm not a Z. I'm not a millennial. I'm an Xer, but I also have my side business.
I'm a Gen Yer. I'm at the end of the older millennials group, age 38, because there was a subgroup, where we have a lot in common with your generation. I've basically turned to a side hustle. You have a friend who's from New York originally, now lives in Florida, who made a course. She was born in 81, right? I think you know who I'm talking about.
I know who you're talking about, but I don't know anything about her age.
Well, anyway,
I don't know a lot about
from that.
age.
Look at somebody like her with what she's built on LinkedIn. Even my friend's never going to understand that, but this is what everyone's doing nowadays. Whether you're young, whether you're in the early 30s, mid 30s, late 30s, early 40s, late 40s, going into 50s, 60s, everyone's doing it nowadays.
I think it's it's like generally accepted now, and it's not
my mother got clients on LinkedIn doing the same thing that you're doing, and my mother's much older than both of us. My mother just turned 67 this year, actually, 1956. So she's been a freelance marketer, her whole life in public relations. She's nabbed clients this way. I know another woman who's a former healthcare executive whose kids went to my high school, down in Florida. After she retired from being a corporate executive, now she's an executive and young healthcare workers coach. She nabs clients this way also. Some people like my best friend, and I love him to death. They're the ones in the young group who have the outdated mindset. Whereas I'm looking at somebody like you, I'm looking at my mother, I'm looking at older boomers on LinkedIn who are embracing the technology and seeking out clients this way. You don't have to build a traditional business anymore, brick and mortar. You can do it online.
Yeah, I think it's just generally accepted more, and people, you have a choice now. You can choose to be a corporate person and just have your corporate job 9 to 5 and do your thing to retirement age, or you can choose maybe a little bit of financial freedom and do some other things that kind of free you up to maybe travel more or have a lifestyle that kind of suits you better. But it feels
what
like
I'm trying to do,
because I think there's just more options, and everybody's just like, do whatever suits you. It's much more accepted to do that now.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think he doesn't understand again. He doesn't understand, like when they used to give me advice, they used to give me hard advice, but I'll leave this for a different podcast. I've enjoyed having you on. So explain to us the mission of Pan Peru.
All right, we're pivoting. Pan Peru is an international nonprofit, and I've been on the board, I think, for less than a year now, but it might be a year. I don't even remember exactly when I joined. But we work with women and children in rural Peru. So Peru is, I guess like many other countries in Latin America, there's some, extreme poverty. and we work with those communities in the rural parts of Peru that are poor, and we help women entrepreneurs, so women who want to start their own businesses. And we also help children. We provide books and technology for children in rural areas so that, to advance their learning opportunities and kind of give them some of the same opportunities that their peers in other parts of the world are able to have access to.
Ah, okay. All right. What was it like this year experiencing being laid off from a company, and what company were you let go from?
I was let go from Salesforce. So I was the head of equality at Slack, which is a Salesforce acquired company. Many of
Funny,
your
they just announced yesterday they're willing to hire 3,000 new people. Interesting. And you were one of the how many that was laid off?
I think it was supposed to be like 10% of the employee population, which adds up to about 8,000 people. So it was like they were about 80,000 at the time. So 10% would be about
Were you
8,000.
in the were you one of the ones that they were like return to the office or else?
No,
Oh,
no, not really. I had a lot of flexibility. Um, but being laid off was has been, not was, but because it's current, it has been quite an interesting experience, certainly a challenging one. But I've used it as an opportunity to grow and expand. So I started my own business back in March. I have attended a lot of networking events and conferences. I am a DEI speaker and coach, so I've had some opportunities to work with companies around that topic. I have focused on telling my story and sharing my journey on LinkedIn, and that's been helpful for me personally, just to have a way to share. And also, I've gotten a lot of really good feedback from other people saying, like, thanks for your candor, thanks for your honesty. It's been helpful, it's motivating, it's inspiring. And I don't think this has been like the best time of my life, but it's definitely been a season of learning and growing, and I've got an opportunity to reflect and really see where I want to use my talents next. And I've also really focused a lot on my health and wellness during this time. So that's been really good for me.
well, this happened to me back in 2000 in 2020 at the start of COVID, where I was let go from the Goodwill. So I had to experience uncomfort because that year, uh, I remember getting let go from there. School shut down for a week where I was working at Hastings on Hudson. 1 week later, they did like the daycare short term hours. By the time we hit the summer, I was approved for the pandemic benefits, but I was working as a personal care aide at that point. School kept the salaries going until the summer of that year. And then after that time, getting close to September, the Goodwill had come back and asked me to reapply. And then I said, forget it. Before the pandemic, they had cut me down to 1 day a week, and they were about to basically attempt to fire me. So,
I mean,
at,
there's been a lot of layoffs. I think a lot of them started at the start of COVID, but certainly by the end of 2022, early 2023, at least in tech, it was pretty pervasive. There was, everybody was letting people go, and there's still people letting people go. Last week, I think Slalom was one of the most recent companies to let a lot of people go. So, it's been a tough market. Interviewing and is very competitive now. You really, um, you
that's why I even said to my buddy last night, I'm like, after showing him what two roles, I'm like, this is why I'm not in a rush to go out there and apply anymore. I don't like what I do, but I'm not stupid in the same aspect to now go try to compete for contract jobs, which are just pointless at this point because it's not, working at United Healthcare, I don't necessarily like the role, but I wouldn't leave it without knowing that what I'm going to do next is either one, if it's going to have to be a temporal, I'm not sure if this is going to turn into a full-time contract again, or I'm just better off building this up and then looking for speaking gigs because I decided to build up a neurodivergent consultancy in addition to helping Minds of Light, as well, so that I can do the educational aspect of this. because at this point, doing a consultancy probably would ideally make the most sense, as I'm also building this podcast into an eventual full services media company that's,
Nice.
going to do things like create.
I love your vision. That's amazing, Ben. I think if you set your mind to it and you bring other people along, I think you are going to be really successful and impactful in this work.
Well, yeah, I've already recruited people, and I would bring you back for panel discussions. And if you believe there's stuff you could be contributing with the media company, we can have that separate conversation as well, because I'm figuring out right now where to incorporate this digitally, and do I want to do it in this state or do I want to do it somewhere else, and just have everyone who's already slowly coming on as well to kind of help out in the process, because there are things I like doing and there are things I don't like doing in building a business. For example, the most successful founders and people who did YouTube, like Andrew Henderson of Nomad Capitalist, want to focus on making content. They don't want to deal with, wearing multiple hats. So even he said it's always best to outsource to other people.
That makes sense. We can't be like the best at everything either. We're not gonna either like everything or we're not gonna be the best at everything. So it makes sense to bring in other people, and it's good to partner, because it's nice to have people on the journey with you that they'll always keep you honest. If you get people on your team that have as much invested in the mission of what you're trying to do, you're going to get good ideas. You're going to get like passion. You're going to maybe get people to lift you up when you hit a challenge or an obstacle. So I always say I'm a big collaborator. I like community. I like building community, and I feel like you always go further when you go together. So
not just with the media company, but with the podcast, I pretty much felt, and even with last week's guest and the roster of people that I've built up through doing this, we have enough. I have two other formats. The other format I want to bring you on is called Opinionated Collective Panel Discussion, and we will be starting, especially now, going into next year as we have an election coming up. A lot of the business themes and a lot of the social themes, they're going to have a little flavor of leaving people the thought of, do you want to help a community go forward? We're gearing toward a federal election next year. I'm not ever going to sit here and tell you who to vote for, but what I'm going to say is as a message, especially next year, is just get out there and vote. Because everyone's got their own preference on who they're going to vote for. And like you said, especially in corporate America, unfortunately, everyone's got a mindset they don't necessarily want to change or they want to adapt to.
Well, I think part of what we can do to impact change is to try and inform and educate people and just make people more aware of things that we know, we have lived experience in, we know about, we feel strongly about, we have a passion for. I think we can educate and inform others. And, hopefully we stumble upon people who are open to listening. I don't think everybody that hasn't changed doesn't want to change. I think some people just need to hear from people like us. So we have an important job to play in changing people's mindsets and opening their eyes to some different realities outside of their own.
Okay, so I'm glad that you came by today, and this was a lot of fun for the both of us. So we'll be in contact because I have panels that I'm starting to plan for the new year, and I'll float topics by you. Thank you for coming by and telling us your story today. I definitely enjoyed hearing about, what you did within finance and tech, and then we got to discuss some personal stuff as well as Maslow, and it was a lot of fun today. All right.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you.
All right.
Keep up the good work.
Soon. Will do. All right. Have a nice day.
You too.